February is the month of romance, and while thoughts of love are in the air down here on the ground, the financially savvy person might want to give some solid thought to whether his or her significant other is in the red when it comes to handling money. So joining us today is Manisha Thakor, personal finance expert and co-author of Get Financially Naked. She's here with 5 questions that will help you find out if your honey has trouble with money. Hello, Manisha. Great to see you again.
Hi, Tanya.
So, Manisha, talking about money is not very romantic, but the statistics are startling when it comes to the top reasons why couples divorce, which is often money, correct?
It's so true. And Tanya, academic studies show that we're predisposed to be attracted to our financial opposite because there's something intoxicating if you're a saver about being with a spender and vice versa.
So if you're with your financial opposite, you've got to find ways to work that out, to find some common ground, if you were, right?
Exactly.
And you have a list of questions that will help us do that. We need to ask ourselves to gauge whether or not we're dating a deadbeat, right? So let's start with the first one. Does your sweetie always insist on picking up the check at a big dinner and or throw down his credit card without even looking at the bill? Now, first of all, that doesn't sound so bad.
You know, it's interesting, Tanya. On the surface, it seems like a very benign issue, but I have noticed in 9 out of 10 situations when somebody throws down the credit card and does not take a look at the itemized bill before paying, it's a strong indication that that's how they deal with their finances as well, in a very cavalier kind of way. And in the recession, I've noticed it's getting worse. A lot of individuals feel the pressure to man up or woman up and show that they're not under any financial stress. They don't even need to look at that bill.
So that's not a good sign. If you see that, that means that that's someone
It's a big red flag.
All right. Even though, I mean, I guess the assumption is that they have money to spare, right, if they're throwing down the card and not looking at it. But even if they do, even if they're rolling in the money, you shouldn't do that.
Right, and what I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that on the surface it may seem like, wow, this is a really kind, generous person, but underneath that is this bizarre red flag, because what I've observed is financially fit people, no matter how much money they have or don't have, almost always routinely look down the bill and make sure that everything is in order before they hand over that credit card. And that's why it's such a telltale sign.
All right. So it's a great thing to look out for. The next question to ask yourself, does he or she have a large but sparsely furnished apartment or home? All right. I get this. They might not have decorating savvy, though, right?
It's true. They could be waiting for their inner design sensibility to present. But there's a wonderful book that I recommend everyone read. It's called The Millionaire Next Door. And in it, the author highlights a phrase we use down here in Texas: big hat, no cattle. And that's what I often see when you're with somebody. And it may not just be the big house that's sparsely furnished. It could be the very fancy wardrobe and nothing else in the home, or the really elegant shoes and the fancy handbag, but struggling to meet the other bills. And the point is simply is that a person's external image may not bear a lot of resemblance to their internal financial reality.
So does this mean, like, let's say your sweetie is like that, let's say your sweetie is all flash and no substance, does this mean this relationship just won't work, or is there a way of working through this?
I think it's something that you have to address head on and talk about it, and it's going to be a really awkward conversation.
Right.
It's like pointing out that you've got something green in between your teeth, but it's permanent.
Yeah, no, it might not go over too well. All right, so the third question you want to ask yourself is, does your sweetie avoid answering calls on his or her phone? Okay, I think I know where you're going with this. Bill collectors, right?
Right. You know, it's possible it could be mom checking in to see how the day or perhaps the date is going. But more and more, we're starting to see people going into collections and people you might not ever expect. And so if you're seeing some odd behavior and there's a lack of discussion around it, I'm not trying to encourage a suspicion and spy-like behavior when it comes to your sweetie, but that may be a signal that it's a topic that you need to put out there. There's something going on that you should be discussing.
But of course, they could just also be extra polite, right? Nobody likes to have their sweetie answer the phone in their presence all the time either, right?
No, it's a great point, Tanya. And these days where people are 24/7 connected, so it's not always a red signal. But I like to put that one out there, especially if it happens over and over on both a cell phone and at homes at times when you might otherwise pick up the phone.
And especially in combination with other potential red flags.
Yeah.
All right. You should always ask yourself, does your sweetie lease his or her car? Is that a bad or a good thing?
You know, I'd argue it's a bad thing, and the reason for this is the whole premise behind leasing is, hey, you can get more car than if you actually bought it outright. Well, anytime somebody tells you you're going to get more for less, your tentacles should go up. And one of my favorite financial gurus, Dave Ramsey, says it shouldn't be called leasing. It should be called fleecing, because that's what's happening to you financially. And leasing had dried up over the last few months, or over the credit cycle, but it's coming back now. And so I want to warn people to be careful about that.
All right, that is good advice just in general. Now, last but not least, you say that we need to ask ourselves if our significant other ever asks us to co-sign or buy anything in our name, promising to pay us back. That's a big, super big red flag.
It is, Tanya, and this is the one that hurts me the most as a feminist, because I see this happening to women so many times, where we tend to be, as a gender, innately generous. People need help, we want to help, but oftentimes what's happening is that we're giving funds to somebody that's using them for improper purposes.
Yeah, no, that is definitely not something that you want to do before you're married, correct?
Exactly, exactly.
In this segment, Manisha joins us to answer some viewer questions. All right, Manisha, thanks for sticking around. You ready?
Always ready for you, Tanya.
Great. The first question comes from V. She sends her question in via Twitter. She asks, what's the best point in a relationship to merge finances? Very good question from V.
It is, and V, you know, that's a lot like asking when is the right time in a relationship to merge bodies, if I were to put it in a PG way. There's not necessarily a right and wrong way. I personally believe when it comes to finances, I'm very conservative, that you should wait to merge until you're married. But sometimes life gets in the way. You find a perfect house, a perfect piece of property that you may want to buy together before you walk down the aisle. If that's the case, my advice is make it legal, draw up documents with a lawyer to decide what's going to happen if you end up splitting up. It's sort of the financial version of hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Absolutely great advice. Now, here's a question from Celise. How do you decide as a couple what an appropriate emergency fund is and who should contribute what percent if the incomes aren't equal? Now, I'm not sure if she's talking about a married couple or an unmarried couple, because that would differ a little bit, wouldn't it?
It would. Let me make the assumption she's talking about a married couple here,
Yeah.
because I'm getting this question a lot. Personal finance experts say anywhere from 3 to 9 months. I would say 3 is the bare minimum if you both have super secure jobs, like you work for the government. Otherwise, I suggest closer to 6, maybe even as much as 9. And if you have disproportionate incomes, to contribute proportionally. So that's a mouthful. If your household income is $100,000, one of you makes $70,000, the other makes $30,000. The one that makes 70 contributes 70% to the fund, and the other one contributes 30% to the fund. That I found is the most equitable way to handle that situation.
That sounds absolutely fair. All right, Abigail tweets in her question asking, how do you bring up a bad credit history without scaring off your boyfriend? That's a tough one.
You know, it is, and I have to say, honestly, the best example of how to handle a tough conversation, I think, is how David Letterman handled his recent transgressions.
Yeah.
It was brilliant. He was just straight up. And that's what I advise any woman or man who has some tough news to deliver to their significant other, but not only just to give the information straight up, but explain the game plan. What steps are you taking to improve that credit score right now?
Because no one's going to fault you for having a bad credit history if you're taking the appropriate steps to rectify it. I mean, at least no one that you have a romantic relationship with, we'd hope.
Exactly. And you know, as America, we love a comeback.
Yes,
You know?
absolutely. We're always reinventing ourselves, correct?
That's right.
Now, Paul sends his question in via Facebook asking, how can you track your spending as a couple without making the other person feel like they have no privacy? It's interesting. This question sort of reminds me of what you were saying earlier, that opposites attract. It sounds like one person here really wants to know where every last dollar is going, and the other one maybe not so much.
I am getting this question so frequently, and it's often coming up in the context of a household where somebody's been laid off, and the spouse that has not been laid off wants to make extra sure what's happening with the finances, but doesn't want to insult the spouse that has just been laid off as if they're being micromanaged. So my suggestion is this: if you don't like budgeting, do big aggregates. At the end of each month, add up how much you've spent in aggregate on credit cards, on debit cards, on checks and automated direct withdrawals from your bank account, and cash withdrawals. Add up those 4 buckets of outflows and compare them to your inflows. And if you are spending more than you're bringing in, then you can have a more detailed conversation.
And break it down. Yeah, that is very touchy, especially when you said if one person in the relationship has gotten laid off. All right, our last question comes from Cate, and she asks, when one partner is handling the majority of the finances, what is the best way to keep the other person up to speed on what's going on with the money? That's also a very good question.
It is, and what I've noticed is we're all so darn busy these days that that's become the norm in most households. You have to divide and conquer to get it all done. So I suggest that at least once a year, you and your mate sit down and you discuss what you guys own and owe in your household, what you're earning and you're spending in your household, and how your money, your savings is invested and how those investments have done. So you're having this annual summit. I also suggest, so that you don't go off the ranch, either one of you, in between, that you set a dollar amount that you each can spend each month, no questions asked, and a dollar amount above which you both agree to consult each other before spending.
That's interesting. So even if you make your own money, let's say, you still suggest you set a limit to what you can spend without asking the other partner about.
On joint funds. So if you do the financial 3-way for joint funds, I suggest your own money, it's yours to do with as you wish. But anything that you're considering in your household joint money, consult each other.
All right, Manisha, thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions. And if you have a financial problem you need answered, remember, go to our website at abcnews.com/business to ask our team of personal finance experts your questions. We'll do our very best to answer them right here on Good Money.